Once you have successfully installed your independent BI portal instance of Izenda, there are additional steps that need to be taken in order to have the deployment report creation ready. This includes setting up a connection string to a reporting database and pulling in those relevant data sources, creating tenants, users, and roles, assigning various permission rights to those tenants, roles, and users, and optimizing data sources through constructing data source categories and aliasing. Your instance has already been connected to a configuration database, whether you've been given a DigitalOcean Izenda hosted Izenda instance or completed the steps of installing Izenda on your own infrastructure. If you've installed on your own, you already have been provided the default Izenda administrator credentials. If you have a DigitalOcean instance, we have provided that information for you. For a DigitalOcean installation, your license key has already been entered for you. If you've installed on your own, you'll need to log in and make sure to put the license key into the provided area of the Settings tab and validate that your license is active. Any extension to your license key will need to be revalidated through the same functionality. The default setup for a DigitalOcean instance is that of a single-tenant environment. If you want to test multi-tenant concepts, you can change your deployment from single to multi-tenant by selecting the value in the System DB and License tab. Changing this setting to multi-tenant would enable the tenant setup area. Here, you can create new tenants, manage existing tenants, and control their access to features and functionalities throughout the platform. With tenant setup out of the way, we can now move to adding reporting data sources to our deployment. Most management of data sources can be handled inside the Data Setup section on the left side of the screen. To begin bringing in these data sources, we'll need to start in the Data Connections sub-tab under the Data Setup area. This is where connection strings to reporting data sources will be entered in, and Izenda will go through each database and pull out any tables, views, store procedures, or user-defined functions, as well as automatically create joins based on primary and foreign key relationships. For a system-level administrator in a multi-tenant environment, it is important to pay attention to what setting level they are currently working under. If the setting level dropdown says System, and data sources are added, these will be accessible at a system level and be inaccessible to individual tenants. Therefore, in order to add connection strings to reporting databases for specific tenants, we will utilize the setting level dropdown to impersonate the newly constructed tenant. Now, we can select what database server type we're going to use, enter a connection string to that database, and then hit the test button to ensure that our database connection string was accurate. If we get a successful response from the system, we can then hit the Connect button for Izenda to begin sorting through all of the various tables, views, store procedures, and user-defined functions within the database. Those values will be populated in the Available Data Sources area below. This is where a system-level administrator could come in and begin choosing what specific data sources will be eligible for reporting purposes by moving them into the Visible Data Sources area. To do this, simply expand out a category, click on the desired item, and move it over to Available. Be aware that any stored procedures that are moved to the Available Data Sources area will run, so make sure to carefully select these. Once everything looks good, be sure to hit the Save button prior to moving on to avoid losing any changes. With all of this in place, management around the data model can be done in the data model area. This is where data sources can be grouped into data source categories, tables, views, and store procedures can be aliased to make items even more accessible to end users, and even field names can be aliased to make it easier to build reports. This is also where you can manage individual columns and mark them as either being visible, invisible, or filterable, or not filterable. From this area, pre-built relationships can be seen in the Relationships tab, and new relationships between data sources can be built through the Add Relationship functionality. Once the data setup fully meets expectations, non-embedded instances of the system allow for the setup of roles and users. Roles share much of the same permissioning functionality that was observed in the tenant setup area, but here, individual roles can be granted or restricted access to the data model on a very granular level. Utilizing similar mechanics to the connection string area, here decisions can be made as to whether or not users of a specific role will be able to get access to various data sources for reporting purposes. Outside the realm of available data sources, there is also a very granular breakdown of various report, dashboard, and miscellaneous permissions that can be managed from this area. User setup is a fairly straightforward concept for users in an independent BI portal instance of Izenda. Various data points will need to be entered to create a user, and a role must be selected in order to move forward unless a user is a system-level administrator. Once this setup is complete, hitting the Save button will lock all of the data in for that user. Then, to activate the account, the Configure Password option button can be used to generate a URL for that user to navigate to in order to complete the setup process and make that user active. Finally, to begin designing reports, navigate to the Report Designer by selecting the plus button next to the Reports tab at the top of the screen. You should see all of the data sources that you've connected to and marked as visible in the Data Model tab. For a more in-depth breakdown of report design, please take a look at our videos around designing your first report or take a look at the documentation for more details.